we must exercise unshakable praise. And I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you ought to give God some unshakable praise. The first reason is that God is eternal. Have I got a witness in here today? You see, when you say that God is eternal, what you are really saying is that God always exists. We may die, but God's still going to exist. Mama may be gone, but God still exists. Papa may be gone, but God still exists. You may have lost your job, but God still exists. You may not know how you're going to make it, but God still exists. And beloved, sometimes you just got to give God some praise and thanks just because God is eternal. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning and the end. He is the one that transcends time and space. Beloved, is there anybody here today that you thank God that God is eternal? But not just that, you ought to thank God today because he's eternal. But you ought to thank God today because God is all powerful. Somebody say he has the power. You see, you and I, we have limited power, but God has all power. When you say when I say that God has all power, what I am saying is that there are no limits on what God can do. Oh, you should have been shouting right there. You see, with you and I, there are some limits as to what we can do. But when you understand that God is all powerful, when you understand that all the power rests in God's hands, that means that if a door is closing, you may not be able to open it, but God can. Oh, I like the way DJ Khaled said. DJ Khaled said that people don't understand how he's being blessed, but he simply says, God did. And beloved, the next time you come across something in your life that you cannot handle, you just turn it over to the one who has the power to make it happen, because God can make it happen, because God is what? All powerful. God is eternal. God is all powerful. And God, the third thing I want to share with you is God is unchanging. Somebody say he's unchanging. You see, in contrast to people and in contrast to life, God is the perfect constant. God's character is holy. God is always just. God is always loving, and God is always wise. Yes, God does not change. You see, what I've discovered about some of us, we will change based upon the seasons of life. You know, that's why some of y'all always beat up on me for being a Cowboys fan, but I'm just trying to demonstrate to y'all that I don't change. Hallelujah. No matter if we're losing or not losing, I don't change. And there's some of you right now, you've been hanging with the Eagles all of your life, and you've been waiting for a person like Jalen Hurts to be on the team. That's why y'all got such a good record right now, is because he's a bad quarterback. But how many of you can remember the days when the Eagles were not in this position? And beloved, there's so many people in life is that they are so fickle. Thank God for the people who don't change. I thank God for the people who have your back. You ought to thank God today that our God never changes. Not only is God eternal, not only is God all powerful, not only is God unchanging, but God is all knowing, which means that there is nothing that happens that God doesn't know. There is nothing that appears that God didn't know anything about. Yes, when we say that God is all-knowing, what we're saying is that God possesses infinite understanding and perception unmatched by any mortal mind. In other words, you may not understand it, but God does. You may not comprehend why God's doing what he's doing, but God does. You may not like the way God is allowing for the different situations situations to happen in your life, but God does. You see, many of us, we want the results of God, but we don't want to have to go through the valley. But what I've discovered in my life is that I may not like his methods, but I sure enough like his results. And sometimes you just can't try to understand it for yourself. You just got to trust God in the process. Somebody say, preach, Pastor. God is all-knowing. God is unchanging. God is all-powerful. God is eternal. And God is self-existing. Yes, when we say that God is self-existent, what we are saying is that God, since God created everything from nothing, that means that God did not come from anything else. You see, I'm so glad to have my children home, and it's amazing how in one season they look like one parent, and in another season they look like another parent. And there was a season that Layla, she looked just like me. But now that she's coming into womanhood, I start to see her look like her mama, even more and more. And she looks like her mama is because her mama's DNA is inside of her. But when you look at Layla and you look at Lena and you look at Kemia, then you got to look at Kemia's mama. And then you got to go back and look at Kemia's mama's mama. You start to get the point that we all are coming from something. But when we talk about God, God is self-existent. God didn't come from anything but God. And therefore, when you are the originator, then you cannot be duplicated. Oh my God. And beloved, I'm trying to help somebody here today. It's because you ought to thank God today that God doesn't have to go check in with anybody, that God doesn't have to go seek anybody else's approval, that God doesn't have to get a stamp from somebody else. No, God is God all by God's self. And because he's God all by himself, that's the reason that you and I ought to give God the praise